The flashing lights hit the windshield at 6:47 in the evening. Maribel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Her heart moved into her throat. Behind her, in the back seat, 7-year-old Noah shifted awake, confused by the red and blue strobing that turned the inside of the car into something from a nightmare. "Mommy?" His voice was small. Uncertain. "It's okay, baby. Just stay calm." She pulled into the parking lot of a closed hardware store. The road was empty except for the patrol car that had appeared like it was waiting for her. 2 officers emerged from the cruiser before Maribel had even come to a complete stop. Both women. Both moving with confidence that came from never being told no. The taller one reached the driver's side window first. Officer Kendra Nayfield. Blonde. Fit. Her eyes scanned the interior of the car the way a predator scans for weakness. She didn't smile. Maribel lowered the window. "License and registration," Kendra said. "Not please." "Not ma'am. Just command." Maribel reached for the glove compartment. Her hands were steady. Her voice was steady. "I know my taillight is cracked, officer. I have the replacement at home. I've been meaning to." "I didn't ask for your story," Kendra interrupted. "License. And registration. Now." The second officer, Rowan Mitchell, leaned down and peered through the side window into the back seat. Her eyes found Noah immediately. He was sitting there with his Batman backpack clutched to his chest, frozen the way kids get when they sense adult tension but don't understand it. Rowan's expression hardened. "You always drive like this, or is tonight special?" Kendra's voice had shifted. It was lighter now. Conversational. Which somehow made it worse because it felt like performance. Like entertainment. "Like what?" Maribel asked quietly. Recklessly. "With a kid in a vehicle this old. These tires look questionable." The tires had been replaced 14 months ago. Maribel knew this. She'd spent $400 she didn't have to make sure they were safe. "Hey. I'm really glad you're here. Be honest, have you eaten today? What did you have? Tell me that, your location, and the time. And if you're new, help me prove something wrong. My mother said drill stories would never reach 10,000 subscribers, but stories like this deserve to be heard. So don't leave without subscribing. It feels empty when you come in and leave without saying a word. Now, let's continue." "The tires are safe, officer," Maribel said. Rowan straightened up. Tapped on the window with 2 quick knuckles. A sound like a threat. Noah flinched in the back seat. "Looks like neglect to me," Rowan announced. To Kendra. To the empty parking lot. Like Maribel wasn't even there. Something changed in the air. The temperature dropped like a stone. Maribel's voice stayed level. "My son is fine. We're just trying to get home." This was mistake number 1. Authority doesn't like calm resistance. Kendra's jaw tightened. Rowan's hand moved to her belt where her cuffs hung. Both officers exchanged a look that lasted maybe 2 seconds but contained everything. "Step out of the vehicle," Kendra said. "Am I being detained?" "Step out." Maribel unbuckled. The cold November air hit her like a slap when she opened the door. Behind her, through the open window, Noah's voice rose. "Mommy? It's okay, baby. Stay in the car." The lie felt thick in her throat. Rowan moved toward the open door with casual certainty. She leaned in and her voice dropped into something almost conversational, which made it worse than if she'd been yelling. "How often are you leaving this kid alone in a vehicle?" "Never. He's 7. I'm always. With a cracked taillight. Questionable maintenance. And you're out here at 7 o'clock driving a child around in what looks like an unstable situation. No car seat for safety, I notice." He's 7 years old. He doesn't need. I'll decide what's required. Kendra's voice had taken on a different register now. Official. Documented. Like she was speaking for a record that would be reviewed later. The way you're driving. The condition of your vehicle. The lack of proper safety. This is how people get hurt. This is how children's services becomes involved. The word custody hung in the cold air like a threat. Noah was crying now. A small, confused sound from inside the car. He didn't understand what was happening. He only understood that his mother was outside. That there were police lights. That something was wrong and he was powerless to stop it. Maribel raised her hands where they could see them. Her voice came out calm. Respectful. Non-threatening. Officers, I'm a good mother. If there's something wrong with my vehicle, I'll fix it. Tonight. I'll. Put your hands higher, Rowan interrupted. Maribel's hands were already visible. She raised them higher anyway. Kendra reached for her belt and unclipped the handcuffs. They caught the light from the patrol car. Metal glinting in the November darkness. She didn't move toward Maribel yet. Not quite. But they were ready. And that's when Noah screamed. A high, desperate sound that cut through the cold air and made Maribel's entire body go rigid. He was pressing his face against the car window, eyes wide, hands flat against the glass. Not understanding. Just knowing something was happening to his mother and he couldn't stop it. Kendra smiled. Not a friendly smile. A smile that said she'd seen this reaction before and it meant she was winning. The patrol car interior smelled like old coffee and plastic seats that had been wiped down 1,000 times. Maribel sat in the back with her hands cuffed in front of her. The metal was cold against her wrists. The partition between the front and back was scratched glass and mesh that made everything feel contained. Locked. Noah was in a different vehicle. That was the part that wouldn't stop cycling through her mind. Rowan had taken him to what she called a safe holding area, while they brought Maribel to the station. Safe holding area. As if that language made it okay. As if Maribel couldn't hear the fear in Noah's voice as they separated. The drive took 17 minutes. Maribel counted them. At the station, they removed the cuffs and placed her in an interview room. Metal table. Metal chairs. A camera in the corner that may or may not be recording. She couldn't tell, so she assumed it was. Kendra entered at 7:43 p.m., carrying a sheaf of papers and a demeanor that suggested she was enjoying herself. She sat across from Maribel without being invited. The papers spread between them like evidence. So here's what we have, Kendra began. Her voice was measured. Professional. Which was worse than if she'd been angry. One 2009 Honda Civic with multiple safety violations. Maintenance records show significantly overdue servicing. The child, Noah, states that he frequently falls asleep in the vehicle, which indicates either neglect or habituation to unsafe driving situations. You've been detained for questioning regarding vehicle safety and potential child endangerment. Maribel's throat was dry. I want to see my son. In a moment. First, I need you to understand something. Kendra leaned back in her chair. The way you're choosing to parent, and I use that word carefully, choosing, creates dangerous situations. Children need stability. They need safety. They need someone who can provide basic maintenance on the vehicle they're transported in. Maribel said nothing. You understand what I'm saying? Kendra continued. This isn't a judgment. It's an assessment. I work 2 jobs, Maribel said quietly. I provide my son with food, shelter, education, and love. I'm not. You're not providing a properly maintained vehicle. You're not providing an environment where a child feels safe. Kendra had started writing something on her papers. Not looking at Maribel while she did it. These are facts. Officer Mitchell and I documented everything. The door opened and Rowan entered, carrying a tablet. She stood beside Kendra with the coordination of people who had done this dance before. Many times. The thing that concerns me most, Rowan said, is the emotional state of the child. He was quite distressed during the traffic stop. Crying. Confused about why his mother was being questioned. That suggests you haven't prepared him adequately for interactions with authority. Which might indicate poor guidance overall. He's 7 years old. He was scared because you approached the car aggressively. We approached the car appropriately, Kendra corrected. And if your child is frightened by appropriate authority interaction, that's actually another indicator of inadequate parenting. Children should understand boundaries. They should respect law enforcement. Maribel's hands had started to shake. She sat on them. I want to speak to a lawyer, she said. Kendra and Rowan exchanged a glance. Brief. But it communicated something. Satisfaction. Of course, Kendra said. That's your right. Though I should tell you that whether or not you cooperate, we'll be filing a report with Children's Services. They'll conduct their own investigation. They'll probably want to interview Noah at his school. They might want to do a home visit. Depending on what they find, they might initiate a custody evaluation process. The word custody landed like a physical blow. Based on what? Maribel's voice had risen. A cracked taillight. Based on a pattern of inadequate care, Rowan said smoothly. We're here to protect children, Ms. Cross. We can't ignore warning signs. They left her alone in that room for 3 hours. 3 hours to sit with the words. To imagine Noah in another room somewhere. To calculate what a custody evaluation meant. To understand that her entire life had just been placed on a table and dismantled by 2 women who decided in the first 30 seconds that she was guilty. The thing about survival is that it teaches you to believe you can handle everything alone. By yourself. Without help. Without weakness. Without admitting that some problems are bigger than your capacity to fix them. She'd built her entire adult life on this belief. Work 2 jobs. Keep Noah safe. Don't ask for anything. Don't need anything. Don't become a burden to people who had already left. But sitting in her car in the cold, knowing that a report had been filed, understanding that Children's Services would arrive within 48 hours, recognizing that 2 officers had decided her judgment was inadequate, all of that was a different kind of failure. Not failing at work. Not failing at money. Failing at the fundamental thing she'd promised herself she'd never fail at, keeping her son. She pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times before a man's voice answered. Not surprised. Not warm. Just present. Hello, Maribel. She hadn't heard her father's voice in 6 years. Dad. I don't know if this matters anymore. Her voice was shaking. She tried to steady it and failed. They're taking my son. There was a pause. Not long. But long enough that she thought he might hang up. Long enough that she understood this was the moment where he would decide if their 6 years of silence meant something. Tell me everything, he said. She did. She told him about the taillight. About the officers. About the threat of custody evaluation. About Noah crying in a police station. About the report that was being filed. About the way Kendra Mayfield had smiled like she'd already won. Her father listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said one sentence, "Where is Noah right now?" "He's asleep in my apartment." "But he's safe." "Yes." "But they said." "Then he's safe right now. I'm calling you back in 10 minutes. He hung up. Maribel held the phone to her ear even though the line was dead. She didn't know what she'd expected. Maybe him to say he was sorry. Maybe him to explain why he'd stayed away for 6 years. Maybe him to sound like a father instead of like someone giving military orders. She got none of those things. What she got was a man who had just spent 6 years not speaking to his daughter, recognizing in 12 seconds that something was wrong. Really wrong. Wrong in a way that mattered. The 10 minutes he said stretched into 9 minutes. At 1:01 a.m., her phone rang. "Listen to me," her father said. "No greeting. No preamble. You're going to receive a call from an attorney named Catherine Washington. She will represent you pro bono. She's the best. You will not speak to anyone from Children's Services without her present. You will not answer questions from the police department. You will not try to explain or defend yourself. You will wait. Do you understand?" "Yes, but..." "Maribel. Do you understand?" "Yes. I'm coming to Massachusetts. I'll be there in 36 hours. Until I arrive, you do exactly what Catherine tells you. Nothing else. You don't try to handle this alone. You don't try to be strong. You let people who know how to handle this situation do their jobs. Can you do that?" She wanted to ask how he could fix this. She wanted to ask what he was going to do. She wanted to ask if this meant he was coming back. If this meant something had changed. Instead, she said, "Okay. I'll call you when I land." "And Maribel?" "Yes. You did the right thing by calling me." He hung up. She sat in the car with her phone in her hand, realizing that her father had just gone from being absent to being present in the span of one phone call. And she still had no idea who he was or what he was capable of doing. She was about to find out. Officer Kendra Nayfield's apartment was clean in the way that came from having nothing else to do but maintain it. Everything had its place. Everything was organized. Everything reflected control. She sat on her couch at 1:15 a.m. with a beer, still in her uniform because she'd come straight home from the station. Her patrol partner, Rowan Mitchell, was in the kitchen making sandwiches like they'd just come back from a regular shift instead of from dismantling someone's life. That one was almost a problem, Kendra said, taking a long pull from the bottle. Rowan appeared in the doorway holding 2 sandwiches. "The mom?" "Yeah." You could see her wanting to fight back. But they never do. They always remember that they have something to lose. Rowan laughed and handed Kendra a sandwich. "The kid'll be in the system for months. Custody evaluation, interviews, the whole thing. Mother'll be too distracted managing that to ever push back. And if she does? We have the body cam footage. We have our report. We have the documentation. We have the system." This was how they thought about it. Not as abuse. Not as power. Not as 2 women who had decided in the first 30 seconds that a poor single mother was guilty of something and then manufactured evidence to support that conclusion. They thought about it as protection. They thought about it as procedure. They had convinced themselves that what they were doing was justice. Kendra stretched her legs out on the coffee table. "I've been thinking about doing this more strategically. There are patterns. Single mothers. No father in the picture. Usually working multiple jobs. They're exhausted. They make mistakes. Easy targets. Easy cases," Rowan corrected. "Yeah. Easy cases." They ate in silence for a while. The news was on the television. Something about politics. Something about taxes. Nothing that mattered to them. Rowan checked her phone. "Report's been filed. Child Services got notified at 11:30. They'll send an intake worker by end of business tomorrow." "Good," Kendra said. "Fastest I've ever seen them move. They know how to prioritize." They didn't talk about the fact that they'd lied in their report. They didn't discuss the vehicle maintenance records they'd misrepresented or the way they'd framed the child's normal fear response as evidence of neglect. They didn't acknowledge any of it because to acknowledge it would mean admitting that they were doing something wrong. And they had never been wrong in their own minds. Authority doesn't like being questioned. When you work in authority and no one ever questions you, it becomes easy to believe that you are the authority. That your judgment is correct. That your decisions have weight and consequence that matter. What they didn't know was that someone was already moving. What they didn't know was that the name on that report, Maribel Cross, had triggered something in a system much larger than the Northampton Police Department. Rowan's phone buzzed at 1:47 a.m. She looked at it and frowned. That's weird. What? Got a notification from the department. Some kind of administrative review. Internal procedures. She kept reading. Says something about potential systemic review of departmental practices. Kendra sat up. What does that mean? I don't know. Could be nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. They both felt it at the same time. A shift. A change in the air that suggested something had started moving in a direction they hadn't anticipated. Something that suggested that maybe, for the first time, they had made a mistake in targeting the wrong person. Neither of them knew that by morning, everything would be different. Neither of them knew that a man in Virginia had received a voicemail at midnight and had spent the last hour making phone calls to people who had the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself loudly. They sat on the couch and tried to ignore the feeling growing in their stomachs. The feeling that suggested they had, for the first time, bullied the wrong mother. Colonel Raphael Cross was sitting in a hotel room in Arlington when the voicemail came through. The room overlooked a parking lot. The room was clean and impersonal in the way that hotel rooms always are. The room had a television that he wasn't watching and a minibar that he didn't open. He listened to his daughter's voice for the first time in 6 years. Dad. I don't know if this matters anymore. They're taking my son. He listened to it again. Then a third time. His hands didn't shake. His breathing didn't change. His expression remained exactly the same. But something had shifted inside him. Something that had been dormant for 6 years had woken up. He looked at the time stamp on the voicemail. 12:34 a.m. Massachusetts time. He calculated the math. His daughter was calling him at nearly 1 in the morning because something had gone catastrophically wrong. He stood and walked to the window. Below him, the parking lot was empty. He picked up his phone and made a call. Andrew. It's Raphael. I need you to pull information on a police department in Massachusetts. Approximately 20 minutes north of Worcester. I need detailed records. Complaints. Internal reviews. Everything accessible. I need it by 6 a.m. He provided the location. He hung up. He made a second call. Catherine. Raphael. I'm going to need federal assistance on a matter. Small-town police department engaging in what appears to be systematic harassment. I'll send you the details within the hour. I need it treated with appropriate priority. He made a third call. Michael. Raphael. Family situation. I need to be on a plane to Boston by 4 a.m. Book it privately. Also, I need to know if there's a custodial threat against a 7-year-old in Massachusetts. Name is Noah Webcross. His mother is Maribel Cross. I need this information urgent. No emotion in his voice. No anger. No threat. Just the clarity of someone who understands exactly how systems work and how to move through them with precision. At 2:15 a.m., someone at the Federal Bureau of Investigation received a directive from someone with sufficient clearance to make directives. Look at this police department. Tell me if there's a pattern. At 2:47 a.m., the person came back with findings. There was, in fact, a pattern. 7 reports filed in 2 years. All involving low-income families. All authored by the same 2 officers. None resulting in court action. All causing significant disruption. At 3:12 a.m., federal oversight quietly notified the police department that their practices were under review. The language was bureaucratic. The threat was absolute. Raphael Cross did not sleep. He sat in the hotel room and watched the Virginia night turn toward dawn. He thought about his daughter's voice. He thought about his grandson, whom he had never met. He thought about the cost of the choices he had made in the name of discipline and distance. And he thought about the specific satisfaction of correcting course. By 4:03 a.m., he was on a private plane headed northeast. By 8:30 a.m., federal agents would be appearing at the police department with questions and clipboards. By 9 a.m., the officers would be pulled from duty pending investigation. By 10 a.m., everything would have changed. But in the darkness of that airplane, Raphael Cross understood something that his daughter didn't yet know. Power doesn't announce itself loudly. Power simply moves. And by the time you realize what's happening, it's already too late. The first sign that something was wrong arrived at the Northampton Police Department at 8:34 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Lieutenant Marcus was in his office when his computer received a notification from the state regarding potential systemic review of departmental practices. The language was formal. The implication was terrifying. He read it twice. Then he forwarded it to the chief. By 8:45 a.m., the chief had called a meeting. By 8:52 a.m., Kendra Blythe and Rowan Mitchell were being pulled from patrol. Administrative suspension, pending investigation, they were told. No explanation. No context. Just removal. Kendra's stomach dropped. This wasn't supposed to happen. Reports like the one she'd filed were filed every day. They were routine. They were forgotten. They didn't trigger federal interest. Rowan's eyes went hard. She understood immediately what had happened. Someone had looked. Someone with enough power to make looking matter had decided that what they'd done warranted attention. By 9:15 a.m., unmarked vehicles arrived at the station. No lights. No sirens. Just quiet, professional men and women with federal credentials who began requesting body camera footage, dispatch logs, complaint records, and internal communications with the casual certainty of people who already knew what they would find. Officer Blythe's certainty began to crack when she realized that whoever was conducting this review wasn't interested in her explanations or justifications. They weren't interested in hearing about the child's distress or the questionable vehicle maintenance. They were interested in pattern. They were interested in the other 6 reports. They were interested in the families involved. They were interested in questions like, how many of these cases resulted in actual court action? How many resulted in custody transfers? How many involved low-income single mothers? The answers were, none. None. All of them. Officer Pike's confidence began to erode when she understood that no one in the department was going to back her up. The chief wasn't defending them. Lieutenant Marcus wasn't defending them. The union lawyer was already calculating how much damage control was possible. It was possible, the lawyer understood, that the answer was none. By 10:30 a.m., they were being asked to surrender their badges. Not temporarily. The way it was being framed, it sounded permanent. At 10:47 a.m., a man in a dark suit walked into the police station. He wore no uniform. He carried no badge. He wore an expression that suggested he was observing data, not meeting people. He spent exactly 47 minutes in the building. During that time, he did not speak to Kendra Blythe. He did not speak to Rowan Mitchell. He did not make any threats. He simply looked at them. A gaze that communicated absolute certainty regarding the scope of their mistakes. A gaze that said, I know exactly what you did. I know exactly what you are. And I decided 30 seconds ago that your career is finished. When he left, both officers understood something they hadn't understood before. They had not been bullying a powerless person. They had been bullying someone whose father had access to the kind of power that doesn't announce itself loudly. The kind of power that simply moves. And by the time you realize what's happening, it's already too late. Maribel's phone rang at 2:17 p.m. The voice belonged to Jennifer Martinez from Child Protective Services, and it was apologetic. Ms. Cross. I'm calling regarding the report filed against you yesterday. I want you to know that we've become aware of some concerns about the manner in which that report was created. We're going to be pausing our intake procedures pending a departmental review. You should expect us to close this case within the week. Maribel's hand shook as she held the phone. So, no custody evaluation? No. In fact, I want to apologize. There was a failure in protocol here. You shouldn't have been treated the way you were. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Maribel said, "Thank you." She hung up and sat on her kitchen floor for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't celebrate. She just sat there understanding that her life had changed direction without her doing anything except making one phone call to her father. At 4:30 p.m., Noah came home from school. He was talking about math problems and playground drama when he walked through the door. He didn't notice that his mother's eyes were red or that she'd been sitting in the same spot for hours. Maribel hugged him longer than usual. He asked why. She didn't know how to explain it. At 5:15 p.m., there was a knock on the door. Maribel opened it to find a man she hadn't seen in 6 years. Raphael Cross looked older than she remembered. His hair was completely gray now. His shoulders carried a weight that came from decades of decisions. His eyes were the same though. They were the eyes that had told her, when she was 7 years old, that strength meant staying calm when everything was falling apart. He was holding a folder. "Hello, Maribel," he said. She didn't know what to say. "This is for you," he said, handing her the folder. "Legal documentation. Settlement agreements. Everything you need to know about what happened and what's going to happen next." She opened the folder. Inside were documents that explained the pattern. 7 other families. 7 other reports filed by the same officers. 7 other cases that should never have been filed. There was a settlement amount that made her knees weak. There was a letter from federal investigators detailing officer misconduct. There was evidence of everything Kendra and Rowan had done. "How did you?" Maribel started. "I made some phone calls," Raphael said simply. "I provided information. The system did the rest." Noah appeared in the doorway behind his mother, curious about the man standing in their apartment. Raphael looked at his grandson for the first time. The boy was small. Dark-skinned like his mother. 7 years old and carrying the weight of a week that should never have happened to him. Raphael knelt down to be at eye level. "Hello, Noah. I'm your grandfather. I should have met you a long time ago. That was my mistake. I'm sorry." Noah seemed to think about this the way children do. Processing. Calculating. "Are you here to stay?" he asked. Raphael glanced at Maribel before answering. "Yes," he said. "I'm here to stay." Maribel felt something break open inside her chest. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated. Something that felt like the beginning of forgiveness. The man who abandoned her was back. And he'd just rewritten her entire life without asking permission. The question now wasn't whether that was right or wrong. The question was what happened next. Subscribe right now because what happens next is where everything gets complicated. Raphael's return isn't a simple redemption story. It's a man trying to fix the past while changing the future. And Maribel has to decide if she can accept his help without sacrificing her independence. Turn on your notifications so you don't miss where the real truth about who Raphael is finally comes to light. And comment below. Tell me, if someone hurt you and then showed up years later to fix it, could you forgive them? Could you accept their help? What would you do? Your answers matter. Your experiences matter. Share them. Build community with people who understand. Because that's what this story is really about. It's about people trying to become better versions of themselves. It's about fathers learning how to be fathers. It's about mothers learning how to accept help. That evening, after Noah was asleep, Maribel and Raphael sat at her kitchen table with the folder between them. She had been reading through the documents for an hour. Body camera footage transcripts. Dispatch logs. Internal complaint records. Financial settlements from previous cases that the department had tried to keep quiet. 7 families. 7 years. 7 patterns that should have triggered investigation long ago if anyone had been looking. How did you find all this? Maribel asked. I made phone calls to people who have access to systems like this, Raphael said simply. The information was already there. No one was looking at it because no one had a reason to look. Until I called you. Until you called me. Maribel turned to a page that showed the other 6 cases. 6 other families with similar stories. Single parents. Low income. Officers Kendra Nayfield and Rowan Mitchell showing up and deciding within 30 seconds that they were guilty of neglect. In 3 of the cases, children had been temporarily removed from homes. In 2 of the cases, custody battles had dragged on for months. In one case, a mother had simply given up fighting and signed over custody to avoid the legal costs. This has been happening for years, Maribel said. Since 2019. 7 confirmed cases. The pattern suggests there could be more. Cases that weren't documented formally. Cases where families were intimidated into accepting the officer's narrative. Raphael opened his laptop and pulled up a file. There's something else you need to see, he said. On the screen appeared a military photograph. A younger Raphael in uniform, Delta Force insignia visible. The image showed him in a command position, decorated, serious. I need you to understand who I am, Raphael said. Not as an explanation for why I left. But as context for what happens next. He walked her through his career. 40 years in military service. 30 of those in classified operations. Access to federal contacts. Understanding of how systems work at the highest levels. Reputation for solving problems that other people couldn't solve. When you called me, Raphael continued, I understood immediately that this wasn't just about a cracked taillight. I understood that something was systematically wrong. So I used the resources I have to look at it. You called federal agents, Maribel said. It wasn't a question. I called people I've worked with. People I've done operations with. People who have authority to investigate departmental misconduct. I provided information. They did their job. The system worked. Maribel closed the laptop. What happens to them? Kendra and Rowan. They'll be investigated. They'll be prosecuted. They'll likely face federal charges for civil rights violations. Their careers are finished. And the families? The settlement that was drawn up covers all 7 cases. Legal assistance for anyone still fighting custody battles. Compensation for families damaged by the false reports. Maribel understood what he was saying. She had just been the first domino. Once Raphael had looked, once the pattern became visible, the entire structure collapsed. Why didn't you come back before? She asked. Raphael didn't answer immediately. Because I was a coward, he finally said. Because I told myself that distance was protection. Because I was so focused on my career, on my mission, that I convinced myself that abandoning you was the responsible thing to do. It wasn't. It was selfish. And I've regretted it every single day for 6 years. Maribel didn't know what to say to that. I can't undo the time I wasn't here, Raphael continued. But I can be here now. I can help. And I can make sure that what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else. How? I'm establishing a foundation. Your name on it. It'll provide legal assistance to families challenging police misconduct. It'll fund independent investigations into departmental practices. It'll work with federal agencies to identify systemic abuse. He pulled up another document. The foundation will be called the Maribel Cross Foundation for Police Accountability. You'll have authority over it. Not me. You. Because this is your story. Your fight. Your voice. Maribel looked at the name on the document. The Maribel Cross Foundation for Police Accountability. I don't know if I'm qualified to, she started. You're qualified because this happened to you, Raphael said. You understand what these families are going through. You understand the system better than most. And you have the courage to speak about it. Kendra Blythe's termination hearing took place in a courthouse on a Monday in late November. The union lawyer was present. The department's legal team was present. A representative from the state was present. Federal prosecutors were present. The body camera footage was played. In it, Kendra could be heard telling Maribel that the way she was raising her son indicated inadequate parenting. In it, Rowan could be heard suggesting that a child's fear of police was evidence of poor guidance. The dispatch logs were presented. They showed that the officers had called in the report before they'd even completed the traffic stop. That they'd flagged it as a priority case immediately. That they'd recommended custody evaluation before Maribel had even been brought to the station. The witness statements were read. A bystander came forward. She'd been in the hardware store parking lot when the traffic stop happened. She testified that the officers had been aggressive and that the child had been crying while his mother had remained calm. Kendra attempted to defend herself. She framed it as overzealousness. She claimed concern for the child. She insisted that the vehicle was not properly maintained and that her intervention was justified. The federal prosecutor presented 7 other cases. 7 families. 7 reports filed by the same officers. 7 patterns of identical escalation. The pattern was undeniable. By the end of the hearing, Kendra Blythe was terminated for cause. Her pension was reduced to minimal levels due to the misconduct findings. She would spend the next 2 years fighting the decision in court. She would lose. Rowan Pike's hearing was almost identical. She attempted a different defense. She claimed that the report was initiated by Kendra and that she was simply following protocol. The email trail didn't support this. The body camera footage didn't support this. The testimony from other officers didn't support this. She was also terminated. She was also facing federal charges. She was also, everyone understood, going to lose. Lieutenant Marcus, who had signed the report without questioning it, received administrative leave and mandatory retraining. He would keep his job technically. But he would never be promoted. Everyone in the department would remember that he didn't stand up for his officers. Everyone in the system would remember that he was part of the problem. He would spend the rest of his career in a kind of professional limbo. The police department itself faced federal oversight. New policies were implemented. Training was required. Body camera footage would be reviewed quarterly. Reports of this type would be flagged for immediate investigation. The civil lawsuits proceeded quickly. The police department's insurance settled rather than litigate. The settlement amount was substantial. It was distributed among the 7 families. Most of them chose to use the funds to rebuild their lives. A few chose to start legal aid organizations. One of those organizations was the Maribel Cross Foundation. It opened its doors 3 months after Kendra Blythe was terminated. The foundation provided legal assistance to families challenging police misconduct. It funded independent investigations into departmental practices. It worked with federal agencies to identify systemic abuse. It was quiet work. It didn't make front-page news. But it worked. Within the first year, 3 other police departments were under investigation. Within 2 years, 8 more. The foundation had identified patterns in 4 states. And Maribel, who had been working 2 jobs in poverty just months before, was now the director of a non-profit that was changing how accountability worked in the system. But here is the strange thing about justice. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like the bare minimum of accountability. Officers Blythe and Pike lost their jobs and faced prison time. But thousands of other officers were still working in departments across the country, engaging in similar abuse. The system that allowed them to act with impunity for so long remained largely intact. Other officers in other towns were, right now, doing similar things. Other parents were right now experiencing their own versions of this nightmare. Most cases were not resolved. Most people were not the daughters of influential men. Most people did not have access to federal contacts. Most people endured. Maribel understood this. She understood that her specific case was resolved because her father had power. She understood that justice without power was a luxury most people couldn't afford. And she understood that this understanding needed to inform everything the Foundation did moving forward. Late one November evening, Maribel sat in her office at the Foundation and reviewed case files. New families. New stories. New nightmares that echoed her own. She picked up her phone and called her father. "There's another one," she said. "Different state. Same pattern." "Tell me everything," Raphael said. And Maribel began to tell him about a family in Michigan. A single father. 3 children. Officers who had decided within 30 seconds that he was guilty of something. The machinery that had worked for her was about to work again. But this time, the power wasn't coming from above. This time, the power was coming from below. From a woman who had learned that survival meant knowing when to ask for help. From a father who had learned that redemption meant showing up when it mattered. From a system that was beginning to understand that accountability wasn't optional. 6 months after the Foundation opened its doors, Maribel stood in a conference room on the 2nd floor of a renovated building in downtown Northampton. The space was modest. Not fancy. Just functional. Gray walls. A long table. Chairs that were comfortable but not luxurious. The kind of office that said, "We're here to work, not to impress." On the wall behind her was a photograph. It was the one Raphael had shown her. Him in uniform. Younger. Serious. But now it was framed and mounted as a reminder of something specific: power doesn't announce itself loudly. Power moves quietly. And sometimes power decides that it's time to move in a different direction. Across the table sat 8 people. Catherine Washington, the attorney who had represented Maribel during the custody threat. She was now the Foundation's legal director. Marcus Chen, a social worker with 15 years of experience. He was the intake coordinator. 3 investigators who had been hired to look into police misconduct across multiple states. 2 volunteers who had themselves been targeted by similar patterns. And Raphael, sitting in the back, observing, supporting, but no longer directing. "The Michigan case is moving forward," Catherine said, opening the meeting. "The family is stable. The child is with the father. The officers involved have been suspended pending investigation." Maribel nodded. She'd been following the Michigan case closely. Single father. 3 children. Officers who had decided within 30 seconds that he was guilty. It had taken Raphael's connections to get the investigation started. But it had taken Maribel's Foundation to provide the legal assistance. "What about the Texas situation?" Maribel asked. 16 families, Marcus said. Same officers. Same pattern. Spanning 4 years. The state attorney general is now involved. Maribel closed her eyes for a moment. 16 families. 16 versions of what had happened to her. 16 times that a mother or father or guardian had been publicly humiliated by officers who believed they were untouchable. "We're going to need more resources," she said. "Already been allocated," Catherine said. The foundation board approved additional funding yesterday. We're hiring 4 more investigators. We're opening an office in Austin. We're establishing a hotline for families to report misconduct. This was the part that still felt surreal to Maribel. 6 months ago, she was working 2 jobs in poverty, terrified that her son would be taken from her. Now she was running an organization that was changing how accountability worked across 3 states. The meeting ended at 5:17 p.m. As everyone was leaving, Raphael approached her. "You did well in there," he said simply. "I'm still learning," Maribel said. "That's how you know you're doing something important. If you weren't learning, you wouldn't be growing." They stood in the empty conference room for a moment. "I've been thinking about something," Raphael said. "About what you asked me months ago. Why I didn't come back before." Maribel didn't respond. She'd learned that sometimes silence was more important than words. "The answer is that I was afraid," Raphael continued. "Not of you. Not of Noah. Afraid of myself. Afraid that I'd become so focused on power and control that I'd forgotten how to be human. Coming back, being with you both, watching you build this foundation, it's taught me something I should have learned a long time ago." "What's that?" "That real strength isn't about having power. It's about using it for something that matters." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Maribel." When he left, Maribel sat alone in the conference room with the photograph of her father in uniform. She thought about 6 months ago. About police lights. About Noah crying. About handcuffs and custody threats and the moment she'd decided to call her father. She thought about how that one decision had changed everything. At 6:30 p.m., she drove to Noah's school. Her son was waiting in the pickup area, surrounded by other children. He'd made friends. He was thriving. He was in a different school now, in a safer neighborhood, with teachers who knew his name. When he saw his mother, he ran to the car with the unself-consciousness of a child who believed he was safe. "How was school?" Maribel asked as he climbed in. "Good. We learned about fractions. And at recess, I taught the new kid how to play superheroes." She smiled. This was what safety looked like. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of stability. They drove home to the apartment that was nicer than the last one. Not fancy, but clean. With windows that looked out on something other than a parking lot. That evening, after Noah was asleep, Maribel received a call. It was Catherine. "We have another situation," Catherine said. "Georgia. A mother. 4 children. Officers are about to file false reports." She reached out through the hotline. "She heard about you. She heard about what happened to you. And she's asking for help." Maribel took down the information. She thought about her situation. About the moment everything changed. About how one phone call to her father had cascaded into something larger than she'd imagined. "Tell her I'm coming," Maribel said. "Tell her we're going to help. Tell her she's not alone." She hung up and walked to Noah's room. Her son was sleeping with his Batman backpack still clutched in his hands. The same backpack he'd been holding the night everything fell apart. She thought about what he'd witnessed. A mother being handcuffed. Police lights. Fear and confusion. But she also thought about what he'd witnessed after that. A grandfather who showed up. A system being held accountable. A mother who turned her pain into a mission. She thought about what that meant for his future. What it meant to grow up believing that injustice could be corrected. That power could be used for good. That asking for help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. She kissed his forehead gently and left his room. At her desk, she began preparing for the Georgia case. She pulled files. She made notes. She outlined a strategy. Because this was what she did now. This was who she'd become. A woman who had been bullied by officers and had chosen not to stay silent. A woman who had asked for help when she needed it. A woman who had transformed her crisis into a mission. The Maribel Cross Foundation for Police Accountability was no longer just her story. It was becoming the story of every family it helped. Every parent it supported. Every system it challenged. And there were thousands more cases waiting. Thousands more families who needed someone to look. Someone to investigate. Someone to say, this pattern is real. This abuse is real. And you are not alone. Maribel understood something now that she hadn't understood 6 months ago. Power wasn't about what you could do to hurt people. Power was about what you could do to help them. And she had finally found a way to use hers. This is where Maribel's story ends. But it's only the beginning of the Foundation's story. Every day, there are families calling the hotline. Every week, new cases are being investigated. Every month, patterns are being exposed. Every year, accountability is being restored to a system that had forgotten it was supposed to protect people, not harm them. Subscribe right now because this isn't just a story about one family. This is a story about a movement. A story about people deciding that enough is enough. A story about power being redirected toward justice. If this story moved you, if it challenged you, if it made you think about systems and power and accountability, comment below. Tell me what you think. Should Maribel have used her father's power, or should she have fought the system alone? What would you have done? Would you have called for help? Your answer matters. Because we're living in a system that's still broken. We're living in a time when injustice still happens. And the only way things change is if people like you, people like Maribel, decide that they're not going to be silent. If you know someone being targeted by police misconduct, if you know a family fighting custody battles, if you know a story like this that needs to be heard, share it. Comment. Tell us. Because that's how we build a community of people who understand that justice isn't about revenge. Justice is about accountability. And accountability starts with someone being brave enough to say, this happened to me. And I'm not going to stay silent. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because the next stories are already waiting. The next families are already reaching out. And we're just getting started. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about this story. Thank you for understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is ask for help. See you in the next video because this, my friends, is far from over.